First question. Now guys, in the previous one, thank you, can we focus? In the previous one, it was already factorized, right? So in the previous paper, 2022, we only got marks for the answers. For this one, we are actually getting a mark for factorizing or using the quadratic formula. Okay, so if you wanted, it's fine if you use the quadratic formula here. Then you would get a mark for the substitution step, like in the next question as well. So for this line, where you've shown your x equals and you're subbing in your a, b, and c values, that will also get you that same mark. All right, and then a mark for x equals 6 or x equals -4. Guys, if you try to factorize, right, say you did 2 brackets, but you did your brackets wrong. So say you got x plus 6 and x plus 4, something. You messed up your signs, right? Or x plus 6, x minus 4. Maybe you swap them around, or both of them are pluses, or both of them are minuses. Then you'll lose that mark, but then these final answers will be CA marks. All right, so if you're not sure if that happened to you, if you have incorrect brackets, then you can just come ask me if you will get CA marks for those. Okay, next one, quadratic formula. You had to use the quadratic formula for this one. Again, in the instruction, it said correct to 2 decimal places. So you have to do that. So you get a mark for your substitution step and then a mark for each of your answers. All right, next one is again a quadratic inequality. So here again you get 1 mark for moving the -4 over to the other side and for changing it to a +4. 1 mark for that. The second mark was not even for factorizing, guys. The second mark was for showing your critical values. Okay, so unfortunately you don't get a mark for that line, but you do get a mark for actually listing them. Remember, like I said with the previous one, if you didn't write CVs there, then you lose that mark. Even if your 2 values are correct, if the word CVs is not there, or the abbreviation, I suppose, then you lose that mark. You draw your parabola. Now, guys, this time the question is saying smaller than 0, negative. So this time we're looking for this section, right? That is the negative section, where the graph is below that line, below the x-axis. So now you have to say between -4 and -1. Guys, I'm thinking maybe some of you are struggling with this notation because I know that it's a very common mistake to swap those two around. Yes?
If there was a case where you had to times it through by a negative, then you need to change the inequality.
Yes, yeah.
That make the graph different.
So you would draw your graph looking like this still, but then your sign would be the other way around, so then you would look for the top bits. Okay. Now, guys, here, again, if you wrote -4 and then you swapped your symbols around like this, then you're going to get 1 mark only. Because 1 mark, because you've written it as one part and you have the correct values, but you lose that mark because your symbols are the wrong way around. If you did the other value, so if you did x smaller than or equal to -4 or x greater than or equal to 1, so basically you're writing the outer parts instead of the inner parts, right? Then the only mistake that you've made is you've looked at the wrong part of the graph. So there you will still also get 1 mark for that. Kewan? Say again? So down here. I don't know. I've never seen that before. I think they would probably just give you a mark here for actually having the values. So then you would get 3 marks for your answer, I think. Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's fine, yes. Alright, I wanted to say one other thing. Oh, guys, you might want to write this in interval notation. It's maybe easier to write it like that. So if you say x element of, And if you're looking at this, between -4 and -1, so you're going to use a square bracket with -4, and then you write to -1. Then you don't have to worry about those symbols, right? And what way around they have to be. So that might be an easier way of writing this. We are using square brackets because the answers have to be included because they are included in the question. Okay. If it was not, if it didn't have that line, you would use round brackets there. Okay, 1.1.4, this was a 4-mark question. This was also a little bit simpler than the previous one because we didn't have to move anything around. You could just square both sides straight away. So square, square, that becomes just x plus 28. Here again, guys, you would have to do your 2 brackets and FOIL them out, right? To get that. But you don't get a mark for that. Your next mark is actually where you have everything on the one side equal to 0. So that is that next mark, the second mark. So that's quite a lot of working actually that you have to do to get to that second mark. Then a mark for factorizing or for using the quadratic formula here. So you would have to show your substitution again. And then guys, here, this is what I was talking about earlier. You're getting 2 answers, but x equals 8 actually doesn't work. It doesn't make the 2 sides equal to each other. So if we're just checking this quickly, if x is 8, this is going to be 8 plus 28, which is 36, right? The square root of 36 is 6. Now if you put an 8 on the other side, 2 minus 8 is -6. So you're getting 6 on the one side and -6 on the other side, so it doesn't work. Okay, so that is why this one is invalid. So if you forgot to check and you just left it as x equals 8 or x equals -3, you're not going to get that last mark. Okay, so you would just get 3 out of 4 for this one. Okay? Yep. For third equations. For third equations. Guys, the reason why we check them, if we're looking at the original equation here, this wasn't a quadratic equation, right? We turned it into a quadratic equation when we squared both sides, which is why we're getting 2 answers. Do you guys remember, if it's a quadratic equation, you're meant to get 2 answers. But this equation to begin with was actually not quadratic. So we actually only meant to technically get 1 answer. We turned it into a quadratic equation when we squared both sides. That's where that x squared came from. Alright, so that's why often one of your solutions won't work. Okay, next one. This one was 6 marks. It was quite a complicated simultaneous equation one just because you had to sub in your x value twice. So what I did here, guys, this is again a situation where I'm not just going to make y the subject because it's the first variable that I see. I'm going to look at that, I'm going to say, but there's a 2 in front of that y. So if I make y the subject, I'm going to get a fraction. I'm going to have 3 plus x over 2. I don't want to work with that. I'm sure you don't want to either. So let's look at x. Let's rather make x the subject then. That is then much easier to work with. So you're just going to move that 3 over to the other side. It becomes -3. And now in your other equation, there are 2 places where there's an x. So in both of those places, you need to replace that x with 2y minus 3. So here, guys, this is 2 times x times y. So do you see, I just put the 2y there next to each other. Oops, sorry. And then the x is there, 2y minus 3 next to it. You could have written it like this. Right? We just don't usually put a y at the back of a bracket. Right? Do you see this looks a bit strange? Which is why I decided just to put the y at the front. Yeah?
When I did that, where I separated my 2 and my y, I got a different answer.
So you would have to then multiply the 2 in first. So you would then get 4y minus 6. And then you must still multiply that y in afterwards.
So it's not through the y that you're not multiplying the y by the original bracket. It's the y after you multiply the 2.
So you could, but then you would still have to multiply the 2 in again. So you could also do it like this. You could say 2 and then times your y in. Like that. But then you must still multiply the 2 in as well. Okay, so you have to multiply the y and the 2. Okay. 1 mark for substitution, guys. There we go, that line. Because there's so much multiplying out here, they gave a mark for actually multiplying all the brackets out. So if you made a mistake here, you would lose that mark, but then they would see A further down. Okay, a mark for standard form. So you would get a CA mark here for the standard form. And then if it's something that can be factorized, or if it's an equation that can be solved, you would get CA for your y values and then also for your x values. Okay, because all of that obviously depends on what you're getting for your standard form.